Hello again. I know it's been so long. I will try to be more consistent, I promise. We are coming into the holiday seasons, so if I'm not 100% consistent, that's why. Anyways, all right, let's do an update. It's been a while. There's been lots of news. The markets have hit record highs on the Dow and the S&P. And that's nothing new. That's not surprising at all. As I've told you guys in the videos in the past for pretty much this whole year, there's been no indication showing that there would be anything that would cause the markets to be in a whole heap of turmoil. And that has held true. The markets have done just what they're supposed to do, and they're just kind of chugging along. And barring any crazy political blowups, it will just continue to chug along upwards all the way into the new year, which is good. So hopefully there's no drama about that. The 2020 in 2020 it will be a lot more upheaval just because it is going to be an election year, and so there's going to be a lot of movements back and forth depending on what the candidates are saying and all of that. Just be aware, statistically, the incumbent does usually stay in office. It's not that it can't. It's never happened that that incumbent has been kicked out. It's not that that hasn't happened. It's just it's very difficult for that to happen. And so I know a lot of people have been saying, well, the polls show this and polls show that. What we found in the 2016 election is that the polls can be very, very wrong. And it's for a very simple reason, which a lot of people don't think about. It's not the pollsters didn't do their job. It's the fact that the demographic that they polled was going to, they tend to be more left-leaning, which means that they were going to vote for Hillary. The conservative demographic base, they're not the type that would take polls. And so this is why right now, if they continue to take polls in the same fashion as they did in 2016, those polls are going to be skewed. And so this is where I'm just like, I don't put a whole lot of stock in those anymore, just because it continues to, I mean, they haven't really made any adjustments for the fact that the conservative demographic base would not typically take polls. And so we'll see what the 2020 election brings, and we have to see, who takes the Democratic primaries. And there's still quite a bit of kind of jockeying for position for that. Warren has definitely pulled ahead quite a bit. But we've seen that in the past where one candidate pulled ahead and then all of a sudden somebody else comes up from behind. And there's more people now late in the race throwing their hat into the ring, like Bloomberg. So we'll see how this all rolls out. The U.S. economy, okay. As I've told you guys before, it's strong, it's stable, it's doing what it should, and that still has not changed. Even though the Federal Reserve has changed or has cut the rates this year, it wasn't because, again, it's not because of the U.S. economy. It's that they're trying to take a preemptive stance against the global factors, which we don't control. And those global factors are mainly the developing economies that never fully recovered from the financial crisis. I know it's been over a decade. But you have to remember, these things take time, not only to manifest, but to also recover from. And so what happened was the financial crisis hit the developed economies first, and then it slowly spread into the developing economies. The developed economies then came out of it, and the developing economies did not. They are recovering, but it's just at a much slower pace there, which makes sense because they have less resources than we do. And so that's where we're seeing, some of the slowdown globally. It's just the emerging economies, the developing economies continue to struggle to rebuild their growth. And of course, Brexit doesn't help. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it does cause a lot of uncertainty and political turmoil for the EU, because this has huge implications. You're talking about the fact that the UK is trying to break out of the EU altogether. Now, it'd be one thing if they weren't part of it in the first place, but they are, and now they're trying to break away. The reason this has huge impacts or implications is because then it opens the door for other countries that might want to leave the EU, and then it puts the EU on shaky ground. So this is why Brexit is so closely watched, and why there's so much opposition towards it is because it has huge implications, and so that's a whole situation that's always developing, um, until it finally happens, which it may or may not at this rate. My gosh, who knows? And then, of course, the trade dispute with China. Oh, the trade dispute with China. Um, it continues to drag out. I've told you guys before that China, they need this agreement more than we do. And it's because there's a lot of debt in China, that they're not talking about, but everybody knows about because everyone buys their debt. So it's not hard to figure out. But as I've said in the past, China has a lot of trading partners, and just basically the whole world. The problem is, though, however, that a lot of their trading partners are not as big as the developed economies, and let alone the U.S., because the U.S. is the largest economy in the world. And so, of course, they need that trade agreement. But as I've told you guys in the past, I've had a professor that he would tell us in class that the Chinese are notorious for trying to change a deal at the last minute. Now, this professor, this course I took, this was like ages and ages ago. And so it was well before the whole China dispute, or even before Trump, or before any of this. And so he was telling us about how they always try to change the deal at the last minute. And it's not that they just try to change the deal a little bit. They try to change it in a big way, and usually in very heavy favor in their direction, which then does not make the agreement favorable for anybody else. And so this is part of the reason that the talks have broken down in the past. It's not the only reason, but it definitely does play a factor into it. So there's that. The Federal Reserve came out yesterday. Jerome Powell came out and said, unless there is big changes in the U.S. economy and with the markets, he doesn't see any need to cut the rates any further. Thank goodness. It's about time, because I've not been a fan of the rate cuts in the first place. And I've definitely voiced my dismay with that. But there just is not a lot of leeway if there were to be a recession coming down the road. Now, not to say that there is one right now. Again, there's no indication stating that, but really the U.S. economy could have higher rates, maybe should have a little bit higher rates than where we're at, and there was no need to cut the rates. And so finally, they've decided to put a hold on the rate movements, which is good. Inflation continues to be tame. Unemployment is at historic lows. We're at 3.5. So there's still lots of jobs out there and a lot of demand for labor, which is good. Manufacturing is not on the same page as unemployment, as we've seen in some of the reports that came out more recently. And that's to be anticipated. The U.S. is a developed economy, and we're going to be doing, especially where we are kind of the tech hub of the world, naturally that area is expanding, and manufacturing is starting to go through some transitions. And so that's not surprising to me at all that manufacturing was down somewhat. I know a lot of people are like, well, that indicates that there's a slowdown. Again, this is kind of like the way you have to look at oil. We just don't consume oil the same way as we did before. So if there's a big supply of oil, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a global slowdown. It just means that we're not consuming it at the same pace as we had in the past, which we shouldn't, because we have new technology that has helped us to curb some of that consumption, like Tesla, or any of the vehicle hybrids like a Prius. And I mean, just there's tons of renewable resources that we're trying to rely upon and heavily invest into. And so looking at manufacturing and saying, oh, well, that's a bad sign because manufacturing is slowing down, that's not necessarily the only way to look at it. You have to look at it from multiple perspectives, because there's multiple factors influencing the manufacturing sector. So that's kind of where that stands. Oil, okay. Oil's been holding steady. It's a little elevated just because there's some tensions in the Middle East, of course, as always. And of course, anytime back east, anytime the East Coast gets hit with, an Arctic blast or polar vortex or, whatever, it causes oil prices to spike, because the East Coast infrastructure for buildings and heating is based on oil. So the West Coast is very much more dependent on natural gas, and the East Coast is very much dependent on oil for heating. So this part of the reason why during the wintertime you'll see oil spiking. It's not because people are driving more in snow, it's because there's a lot more consumption in oil for heating purposes. So that pretty much covers a whole bunch of stuff in this video. We will continue to see what the Federal Reserve does come December. They are going to meet for the last time of the year, and then we'll get thrown into the election year. So that'll be a crazy ride. Again, as always, if you guys have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below. And I'm more than happy to discuss them with you guys. And of course, hit that subscribe button, and I will talk with you guys later.